The security camera recording is indistinct, but the audio is clear. A heartrending cry reverberates through the deserted hospital corridor at 3:17 a.m. A German shepherd, drenched by the tempestuous weather outside, pushes his injured paws against the glass doors, his laments piercing enough to rouse the night shift nurses. He isn't vocalizing for sustenance. He shows no fear of the thunder. He gazes directly into the reception area, his eyes fixed on the lift doors as though anticipating an individual who did not return. Then the footage captures it, the instant one nurse exclaims, indicating the dog's collar from which a medical identification tag hangs, corroded and difficult to decipher. But two words are prominent: save Ethan. Who is this Ethan? For what reason is this dog here unaccompanied? And why does his persistent gaze towards the ICU entrances send a chill down the nurse's spine, colder than the rainwater still clinging to his coat? This enigma began to unfold at Mercy General Hospital, and the eventual revelation rendered even the physicians astounded. The automatic doors of Mercy General Hospital slid open and closed with a detached, mechanical sound, unaware of the trembling animal just beyond their access. A German shepherd stood in the driving rain, his light brown fur soiled with muck and a more sinister substance, blood. His paws left reddish marks on the pavement as he moved back and forth, his whimpers piercing the persistent rhythm of the tempest. Every few moments, he'd push his snout against the glass, clouding it with rapid, distressed exhalations. Inside, the artificial lights blinked erratically, projecting unsettling silhouettes across the vacant lobby. Nurse Maria Santos was midway through her coffee break when a noise reached her ears, not precisely a bark nor a full howl, but a visceral, urgent cry that caused a shiver to run down her spine. She let her cup fall, its contents spilling onto the linoleum floor as she hurried to the doorway. The other night shift nurses followed, their drowsy bewilderment transforming into astonishment as they observed the situation, the dog visibly wounded yet unwilling to retreat from the doors, his tawny eyes fixed on Maria. And in that instant, she felt certain he was attempting to communicate. Subsequent review of security recordings would reveal the precise instant the canine, later to be called Atlas, made his appearance, 3:17 a.m., limping with determination. His head turned towards the hospital's upper levels where the ICU windows emitted a faint glow against the storm. One of the nurses, an older woman named Gail, reached for a towel, but Atlas paid it no mind, his focus riveted on the elevator banks. A ragged laceration along his ribs still oozed, the fur surrounding it matted with grime and congealed blood. Then Maria noticed it, the gleam of metal beneath his collar, a tag. She extended her hand slowly, her fingers brushing against the cold, rain-slicked surface. The words were worn but clear: save Ethan on one side, and on the other a phone number partially obscured by rust. The nurses exchanged questioning looks. Who is Ethan? Why was his dog here by himself in the dead of night, bleeding yet refusing aid? The questions hung in the atmosphere, dense and unvoiced. Atlas abruptly surged forward, not with aggression but with a frantic impetus, his paws skidding on the wet floor as he attempted to push past them. His barks were sharp, insistent, aimed down the corridor towards the ICU wing. One of the orderlies grumbled, "Dogs aren't even allowed in here," but Maria was not paying attention. She was staring at the security monitor where the footage now displayed something chilling. Atlas had not arrived alone. In the shadows of the parking area, just outside the camera's view, something or someone had been observing. Then the power faltered, and in that fleeting moment of darkness, Atlas emitted a sound none of them would ever forget. A howl so laden with grief it seemed impossible it originated from an animal. By the time the lights returned, he had vanished. Only the bloody paw prints lingered, trailing down the hallway leading directly to the ICU. The hospital corridors, typically so immaculate and predictable, thrummed with an electric strain as the night personnel hastened to comprehend the enigmatic German shepherd. Maria Santos knelt beside the succession of paw prints, her fingers quivering as they hovered over the dark stains. The blood was recent. Atlas was injured, perhaps severely. Yet he had disappeared into the labyrinth of white passages as if drawn by some unseen impetus. Dr. Lena Rivera, the hospital's chief veterinarian, arrived within minutes. Her medical kit in hand, she scrutinized the security footage frame by frame, her keen eyes discerning details the others had overlooked. "Observe his gait," she murmured, indicating the screen. "He's favoring his right foreleg. But that's not what's impeding him." She magnified the image of Atlas's face. His pupils were dilated with pain, yet his expression was uncannily focused. This dog isn't disoriented. He's on a specific course. The discovery of the microchip was anticipated to resolve all uncertainties. However, when Maria phoned the registered owner's number, an automated voice stated that the service to the line was no longer active. The address on record led to a vacant apartment on the city's periphery. The landlord confirmed the tenant, Ethan Cole, had been evicted months prior due to unpaid rent. A quiet fellow, the landlord recollected, always accompanied by that large dog. Then one day, he simply ceased returning. Back at the hospital, Mr. Patel, the elderly janitor, paused his mopping to examine a photograph Maria presented to him. Yes, I recall this man, he affirmed, tapping the image of Ethan smiling alongside Atlas. Came to oncology frequently, invariably in a wheelchair, but never without his dog. His brow creased, until one day he was alone, seemed emptier somehow. The tempest outside mirrored the escalating turmoil within the hospital's confines. Thunder shook the windows as Dr. Rivera carefully detached Atlas's collar, uncovering a folded piece of paper concealed beneath the leather, waterlogged and nearly illegible, but the heading was unmistakable. Mercy General Hospital Pharmacy. A prescription label for Ethan Cole, dated just 2 days prior, for morphine. Maria's breath caught. Morphine. The fragments were coalescing into a picture she was reluctant to confront. Atlas's sudden bark resonated from somewhere deeper within the hospital, sharp and demanding. The sound guided them to the ICU wing, where the dog stood rigidly before the secured doors, his entire body vibrating with intensity. The ICU nurse on duty turned pale. That's impossible. We've had no canine alerts tonight. But Atlas wasn't signaling an alert. He was waiting, observing the doors with an almost human-like desperation. Then the heart monitor inside the ICU commenced its shrill, unceasing alarm. Code blue. As emergency teams hurried past, Maria locked eyes with Atlas. In that instant, she comprehended. This was not merely a lost dog seeking its owner. This was a desperate race against time, and the clock had just expired. The ICU doors flew open as the emergency response team hurried inside, their vocalizations mingling with the piercing electronic wail of the non-responsive monitor. Maria briefly saw the patient, an emaciated individual with hollowed cheeks, his complexion pallid beneath the stark illumination, before Atlas pushed by her, his strong form maneuvering through the narrowing gap of the doors before any intervention was possible. The last thing she perceived was the canine's tail vanishing into the turmoil, his nails tapping urgently on the floor tiles. Subsequent review of security recordings would show the ensuing events. Atlas jumping onto the bed of the patient in cardiac arrest, disregarding the vocal medical personnel as he pressed his muzzle into the man's neck. A nurse initiated a move to remove him, then paused abruptly, her fingers making contact with the faint tattoo on the patient's forearm. A German Shepherd outline with the name Atlas inscribed boldly beneath it. Downstairs, Maria searched Ethan's forsaken apartment, her flashlight beams slicing through the accumulated dust. The space retained the spectral imprint of a life suddenly halted, a partially made bed, a dog bowl still containing stale food, and on the wall, a calendar with the final date circled in red, 3 days ago, the words last treatment, scrawled beneath in unsteady handwriting. The neighbor's account provided the final, heartrending details. He was in a very poor state towards the end, the elderly woman recalled, her voice trembling. That dog never left his side until... She paused. Until Ethan departed first, said something about not wanting Atlas to witness his passing. Back at the hospital, Dr. Rivera examined Atlas's injured paw under bright lights, extracting slivers of glass from between his pads. These are from a window, she murmured. He broke through something to reach here. Her hands stilled as she reconstructed the timeline. Atlas had been alone for days, confined in that empty apartment before shattering his way to freedom to Ethan. The storm reached its peak as lightning lit up the ICU windows, casting stark silhouettes across the walls. Inside, Atlas lay draped across Ethan's inert form, his muzzle pressed to the man's chest as if listening for a heartbeat that declined to return. Nurses whispered about improbable occurrences, how the monitors had briefly stabilized when Atlas first leaped onto the bed, how the dog's whimper seemed to synchronize with the struggling rhythm of Ethan's pulse. Then came the discovery that altered everything. Beneath the folds of Ethan's thin hospital gown, clutched in his skeletal hand, was a crumpled photograph. The image depicted a younger, healthier Ethan in firefighter attire, kneeling beside a German Shepherd puppy. Inscribed on the back in fading ink, "Atlas, my saving grace." As rain lashed against the windows, Maria grasped the dreadful truth. This was not merely a tale of a dog locating his owner. It was about a final, desperate effort to bid farewell, and Atlas was not prepared to relinquish his hold. The steady cadence of the heart monitor became irregular as Ethan's condition worsened. Each faltering spike on the display mirrored Atlas's increasingly agitated movements. The German Shepherd traversed the length of the ICU, his nails clicking against the tile in a rhythm that matched the nurse's hurried pace. Dr. Rivera observed in amazement as Atlas abruptly halted, his entire body tensing before he emitted a soul-piercing howl that echoed through the sterile chamber, a sound so imbued with grief and resolve that several staff members froze in their actions. At the precise moment Atlas's cry subsided, Ethan's monitor flatlined. The code team sprang into action, their voices overlapping as they announced medications and readied the defibrillator. But Atlas acted first. Before anyone could intervene, he lunged onto the bed, his 90-pound frame straddling Ethan's chest as he began licking the man's face with desperate insistence. A nurse moved to pull him away, but Dr. Rivera raised a hand, her medical expertise conflicting with something deeper, something primal she could not articulate. Then the impossible transpired. As Atlas nuzzled against Ethan's neck, the heart monitor produced a single, strong beat. Then another. The code team stood motionless as the line on the screen began to display a weak but steady rhythm. No one spoke. No one drew breath. The only sound was Atlas's quiet whimpers as he settled against Ethan's side, his warm body curled protectively around his human's torso. In the stunned silence that ensued, Maria noticed what others had overlooked. Ethan's fingers, previously limp at his sides, had twitched upward, his fingertips just brushing Atlas's fur. The movement was slight but undeniable, a connection, a response. Downstairs in the hospital cafeteria, Mr. Patel sat with Clara, the social worker, their heads inclined over a laptop showing Ethan's military records. "Decorated firefighter," Clara murmured, scrolling through news articles. "Saved 7 people from that factory fire on Elm Street before the roof collapsed on him." She paused at a photo of a younger Ethan accepting a medal, Atlas sitting proudly at his feet. They said his back injuries ended his career, but her voice trailed off as she navigated to a more recent article. A small piece about a firefighter battling cancer who had been evicted from his apartment. The date was 3 weeks ago. Back in the ICU, Dr. Rivera examined Atlas more comprehensively under the bright lights of the treatment room. The dog endured her probing with quiet weariness, his eyes never straying from the door that led back to Ethan. As she cleaned his wounds, she uncovered something startling. Beneath the mud and blood matting his fur were faint traces of ash, fire ash. The pieces converged with terrible clarity. Atlas hadn't merely escaped an empty apartment to find Ethan, he'd escaped a fire, and judging by the fresh burns concealed beneath his fur, it was a fire he'd run directly through to arrive here. The revelation hung heavy in the atmosphere as Maria returned from the records room, her face pale. She held up a single sheet of paper, Ethan's most recent medical scan. The image showed cancer consuming his body, but what made Dr. Rivera's breath catch was the timestamp. This scan had been taken just 6 hours before Atlas appeared at the hospital doors. Somehow, against all probability and logic, this dog had known his person was dying, known where to locate him, and known with every fiber of his being that he couldn't let go. Not yet. Not like this. As night deepened outside the hospital windows, Atlas resumed his vigil at Ethan's bedside, his chin resting on the man's chest as if listening for something only he could perceive. The nurses adjusted their routines around him, no longer attempting to remove him. There was an understanding now, unvoiced but profound. This wasn't just a patient and a pet, this was love in its purest, most tenacious form. And love, it appeared, was not prepared to capitulate. The hospital corridors hummed with hushed conversations about the apparent miracle in ICU room 217. Nurses from other departments found reasons to pass by, stealing looks at the German Shepherd who steadfastly remained by his owner's side. Atlas had transformed into a silent guardian, his body curled protectively around Ethan's motionless form, rising only to drink from the bowl Maria maintained by the entrance. His eyes observed every movement in the room with an almost human-like concentration, as if challenging the world to attempt to take Ethan from him once more. Dr. Rivera pored over Ethan's medical charts late into the night, the luminescence of her computer screen casting shadows across her fatigued face. The figures were perplexing. By all medical reasoning, Ethan should have succumbed to sepsis hours earlier. His organs were failing, his body consumed by untreated cancer and infection. Yet, his heart persisted in beating, weak but resolute whenever Atlas rested his head on Ethan's chest. The phenomenon defied medical explanation, yet the evidence unfolded on the monitors with each steady pulse. Down in the hospital basement, Mr. Patel showed Maria something he had discovered while cleaning, a small duffel bag concealed behind a vending machine. Inside were Ethan's few remaining belongings, a firefighter's badge, a worn leather wallet holding $17, and a folded letter addressed to whoever finds Atlas. The words blurred as Maria read them aloud in the dim illumination. He's trained to dial 911 if someone collapses. Knows how to fetch medicine bottles by name. Please. He's all I have left to give the world. The date on the letter corresponded to the day Ethan vanished from his apartment. As dawn painted the sky in pale gold, Clara made a discovery that sent tremors through the staff. Searching through local news archives, she unearthed a forgotten report from the night Atlas arrived, a minor house fire in the derelict industrial district where Ethan had evidently been residing. The fire chief's account noted something unusual. Neighbors reported hearing a dog howling before the flames were detected, and the sole item salvaged from the blaze was a framed photograph found mysteriously intact amidst the cinders. A picture of a firefighter and his German shepherd. Back in the ICU, Atlas suddenly stood, his ears pricking forward. The movement was so abrupt that the nurse monitoring Ethan's vitals started. The dog paced to the door, then back to the bed, his whimpers growing more insistent. Dr. Rivera arrived just as the monitors began their ominous warning chime. Ethan's oxygen levels were plummeting again. This time, however, Atlas didn't leap onto the bed. Instead, he did something entirely unexpected. He ran to the corner of the room where Ethan's few possessions lay in a hospital-issued bag. With careful precision, he extracted a small, worn teddy bear, the type given to pediatric patients, and carried it gently to the bed, placing it onto Ethan's chest. The room held its breath. Then slowly, incredibly, Ethan's fingers twitched towards the bear. It was the first voluntary movement he had made in days. Maria, observing from the doorway with tears streaming down her face, understood before the others. "That's not just any bear," she whispered. She turned it over, revealing a small hidden compartment in the stuffing, the kind used for storing emergency medication. Inside was a single vial of morphine, nearly empty. Atlas hadn't just been attempting to comfort Ethan, he had been trying to administer treatment just as he had been trained. The realization washed over the medical staff in waves. This dog hadn't simply found his way to the hospital through some miraculous instinct. He had followed a meticulously ingrained routine, performing tasks his owner had taught him step by step, even as his own body bore the wounds of his journey. As the sun rose higher, casting warm light across the hospital floor, something equally miraculous occurred. Ethan's eyelids fluttered, just once, barely perceptible, but it was enough to send Atlas into a quiet frenzy of licks and nudges. The monitors began displaying stronger vitals, the lines on the screens becoming more regular with each passing minute. Dr. Rivera termed it medically inexplicable. The nurses called it divine intervention. But Maria, watching Atlas press his forehead against Ethan's as if transferring some invisible strength, knew the truth. This wasn't a miracle, it was love, pure, stubborn, unrelenting love that refused to accept defeat. And in that moment, as the hospital hummed around them with its routines and rules and sterile protocols, something ancient and powerful thrummed between the broken man and his faithful dog, a connection that transcended medicine, that defied logic, that whispered of bonds no illness could sever, the kind of bond that could bring someone back from the brink if only they believed hard enough, if only they held on tight enough. And Atlas, it seemed, had no intention of letting go. The hospital lights wavered as another summer storm approached, the distant thunder appearing to echo the mounting tension within ICU room 217. Atlas stood rigidly at the foot of Ethan's bed, the fur along his spine bristling as he stared at the ceiling fixtures with an intensity that made Nurse Maria's skin tingle. The German shepherd had not relaxed since the discovery of the medication bear hours before, his amber eyes tracking unseen menaces in the sterile atmosphere. Dr. Rivera reviewed Ethan's latest scans with increasing incredulity. The images revealed impossible advancements, tumors diminishing, infection indicators decreasing, as if his body were rewriting medical literature with each passing hour. "This surpasses the placebo effect," she murmured to Maria, her fingers trembling slightly as she indicated the scans. "It's as if his cells are recalling how to heal." In the basement, Mr. Patel made a discovery that sent shivers through the staff. While inspecting the electrical panels, he found scorch marks ascending the walls, fresh damage not present the previous day. The hospital engineer confirmed the alarming truth. Faulty wiring in the ICU wing was overheating, the same wiring that supplied power to Ethan's life support equipment. It could fail any minute, the engineer warned, already reaching for his tools. Atlas's demeanor grew more erratic as the storm intensified. He alternated between nudging Ethan's limp hands with his nose and pacing the room's perimeter, his claws clicking a frantic rhythm against the tile. When Maria attempted to calm him, the dog did something unprecedented. He gently took her wrist in his mouth and pulled her towards the door, his eyes wide with warning. The initial spark occurred without a sound, a brilliant blue flash from the overhead light fixture that showered tiny embers onto Ethan's bedsheets. Atlas lunged, knocking the smoldering fragments away with his paws before they could ignite. Then the true horror commenced. With a deafening pop, the entire ICU wing plunged into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie red shadows as the hum of ventilators and monitors ceased. Somewhere down the hall, an alarm began to blare, the fire alert. Chaos erupted as nurses rushed to manually ventilate critical patients. In the crimson gloom, Maria saw what Atlas had sensed all along, thin wisps of smoke curling from an electrical outlet near Ethan's bed. The German shepherd positioned himself between the danger and his human, his body vibrating with protective fury as the smoke thickened. Then came the smell, acrid and unmistakable, of burning plastic wiring. The fire was inside the walls. Atlas didn't await permission. With a strength that contradicted his injuries, he clamped his jaws around Ethan's hospital gown and began dragging him towards the door. The four-stand toppled with a crash, the needle tearing from Ethan's arm as Atlas pulled with desperate determination. Nurses rushed to assist, grabbing the bed's rails as the first orange glow appeared in the wall panel behind them. The hallway filled with shouting as evacuation orders blared through the speakers. Orderlies scrambled to move patients while nurses formed a human chain, passing medications and charts. Throughout it all, Atlas never left Ethan's side, his body pressed tightly against the gurney as they hurried towards the stairwell. As they reached the third-floor landing, the unthinkable transpired. Ethan's eyes flew open, not the faint flutters from before, but true awareness blazing in his sunken features. His cracked lips moved, forming a single word that was lost in the chaos. But Atlas heard, the dog's answering whine cut through the noise like a knife. Outside in the parking lot, beneath the stormy sky, the hospital staff witnessed something that would become legendary. As rain washed soot from their faces, Ethan Cole extended one trembling hand towards his dog. And Atlas, faithful, battered, miraculous Atlas, placed his paw gently in that shaking palm, completing a circuit of trust that not even death dared to interrupt. The fire department arrived to find an extraordinary scene. Dozens of patients and staff huddled under makeshift canopies, and at the center, a ghost-thin man and his German shepherd sitting forehead to forehead, their breath mingling in the storm-chilled air. The hospital smoldered behind them, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. Because after 6 days of miracles and near misses, one truth remained undeniable: wherever these two souls were meant to be, they were meant to be there together. And not even the gates of hell could alter that. Rain drummed against the improvised triage shelter as Ethan drifted in and out of awareness, his skeletal fingers entwined in Atlas's fur. The German shepherd had not stirred from his side since the evacuation, his body curled around Ethan's wheelchair like a living bulwark against the tempest. Hospital personnel moved around them in organized disarray, transferring patients to ambulances destined for neighboring medical facilities, but a protective perimeter had formed around the pair. No one dared to separate them now. Maria knelt beside the wheelchair, her stethoscope pressed to Ethan's chest. What she heard made her breath catch. Where there had been the faint, irregular flutter of a failing heart the previous day, now thrummed a strong, steady rhythm. His skin, once the hue of old parchment, displayed faint pink undertones beneath the soot and perspiration. When she lifted his wrist to check his pulse, his fingers reflexively tightened around hers with surprising vigor. Atlas whined softly in his throat, his damp nose nudging Ethan's limp hand until it rested atop his head. The dog's eyes never left Ethan's face, as if sustaining some unbreakable connection between them. Dr. Rivera observed this silent interchange with professional astonishment, her medical training warring with what her eyes insisted was true. This man, given last rites 3 days prior, was recuperating at an impossible velocity. As night descended and the final ambulances departed, a complication arose. No nearby hospitals could accommodate Ethan, not with their own influx of patients from the fire. "We'll establish a temporary unit in the outpatient wing," Dr. Rivera decided, gesturing to the sole undamaged section of Mercy General. It's not ideal, but… She never completed the sentence. Atlas abruptly stiffened, his ears pricking forward. Before anyone could react, the dog lunged towards Ethan's wheelchair, his paws striking the footrests with deliberate force. The chair rolled backwards several feet just as a section of the damaged hospital roof collapsed precisely where they had been situated. Dust and debris billowed upward, coating everyone in a fine gray powder. Through the suffocating cloud, Ethan's voice emerged, weak but distinct. For the first time in weeks, Atlas knows. Those two words sent a ripple of urgency through the exhausted staff. Maria rushed forward, her flashlight beam revealing what Atlas had sensed before anyone else. Fresh cracks spiderwebbing across the triage shelter's support beams. We need to move now. The evacuation transformed into a flurry of shouting and motion as orderlies wheeled Ethan towards the outpatient wing, Atlas trotting alongside, his muzzle brushing against the man's dangling fingers every few steps. The connection between them pulsed like a visible current, each deriving strength from the other in equal measure. Inside the provisional treatment room, Maria made another startling discovery. While changing Ethan's bandages, she found old scars along his spine, the devastating firefighter injury that should have left him permanently immobilized. Yet, when she conducted a reflex test, his toes curled. Then his foot twitched. Then, incredibly, his right leg lifted nearly an inch off the bed. Atlas observed these small miracles with quiet contentment, his tail thumping against the mattress in a steady rhythm that matched Ethan's improving vital signs. When Dr. Rivera re-examined his latest scans, her hands trembled. The tumors had shrunk by nearly 40%. His white blood cell count was normalizing. Even the deep bed sores from weeks of immobility showed fresh pink healing at the margins. As midnight neared, Maria sat with Clara in the dimly lit hallway, both women too agitated to sleep. Clara scrolled through her phone, showing Maria the viral hashtag Atlas the Miracle Dog that had proliferated across social media. News outlets from 3 states were contacting the hospital, while a GoFundMe for Ethan's care had surpassed $200,000 in just 12 hours. Back in the treatment room, Ethan stirred again, his eyelids fluttering open for longer intervals. Each time he surfaced, Atlas was there, licking his face, nuzzling his neck, pressing his warm body against Ethan's side as if transferring life itself back into his broken frame. During one of these waking moments, Ethan's cracked lips formed words that made the night nurse gasp. Atlas saved me twice. His voice was little more than a whisper, but the meaning resonated clearly. The fire at the abandoned house had not been accidental. Ethan had set it himself, intending to end his suffering. Only Atlas's intervention had saved them both. The realization hung heavy in the room, a testament to the dog's unwavering loyalty, even when his human had surrendered hope. Outside, the storm finally abated. Rain yielded to startling clarity, a sky full of stars visible through the hospital's fractured windows. In that quiet hour before dawn, as monitors beeped their steady rhythms and exhausted staff caught moments of repose, something remarkable occurred. Ethan Cole sat up, not with assistance, not partially. He simply sat upright. Atlas immediately positioned himself in Ethan's lap, his massive frame trembling as Ethan buried his face in the dog's fur. No words were spoken. None were needed. The way Ethan's arms enveloped Atlas, the way the dog melted into the embrace, articulated everything about battles fought, darkness overcome, and a bond that had literally defied death. Maria, observing from the doorway with tears streaming down her face, understood she was witnessing something far beyond medical science. This was the power of love in its purest form, and it was only just beginning. Golden morning light streamed through the windows of Mercy General's newly renovated therapy garden, illuminating the crowd that had assembled for this improbable celebration. 6 months after the fire, the hospital courtyard had been transformed into a sanctuary, its centerpiece a bronze plaque depicting a German Shepherd mid-leap, forever captured in an act of protection. Ethan Cole stood before it, his posture straight and robust, with Atlas sitting proudly at his side. The scars they both bore, Ethan's along his spine, Atlas's across his paws, were living testaments to their journey. The transformation in Ethan was nothing short of miraculous. The emaciated, dying man from the ICU had been replaced by someone vibrant, his face fuller, his eyes bright with purpose. When he spoke, his voice carried across the hushed assembly with quiet authority. "This garden isn't just for Atlas," he stated, his hand resting on the dog's head. "It's for every silent hero who reminds us that love is worth fighting for." His gaze found Maria in the front row, then Dr. Rivera, Mr. Patel, and Clara, the individuals who had become family during his darkest hours. Atlas wore a custom vest embroidered with "Ask Me About Hope," his tail wagging gently as children from the pediatric ward approached. A little girl in a wheelchair reached out with trembling fingers, and in that moment, something magical transpired. Atlas lay down beside her, pressing his head against her legs with the same gentle insistence he had used to pull Ethan back from death's door. Tears streamed down her parents' faces as she laughed, her first unassisted movement since her accident. The ceremony progressed with a series of surprises. The mayor presented Atlas with a key to the city, calling him the Soul of Mercy General. Then Clara stepped forward, announcing that Ethan's story had inspired Atlas's law, new legislation funding service dogs for veterans and low-income patients. But the true highlight came when Dr. Rivera unveiled the hospital's newest program, therapy dog visits, guided by none other than Atlas himself. As the crowd dispersed, Ethan knelt beside his best friend, their foreheads touching just as they had that stormy night in the parking lot. "You never gave up on me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Atlas responded by licking his cheek, his tail thumping against the freshly laid grass. Nearby, Maria watched with tears in her eyes, recalling the broken man and his bleeding dog who had stumbled into their lives half a year prior. The story came full circle when a young nurse, new to Mercy General, approached Ethan hesitantly. "How did you know?" she inquired. "Know what?" Ethan replied. "That you'd survive." The question lingered in the air as Ethan pondered it. Then he smiled, scratching behind Atlas's ears. "I didn't," he conceded. "But he did. And sometimes that's enough." As sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Ethan and Atlas walked towards their new residence, a small cottage on the hospital grounds where Ethan worked as a peer counselor and Atlas served as chief morale officer. Their path took them past the emergency room doors where this extraordinary journey had commenced. Atlas paused, sniffing the air as if remembering that rain-soaked night. Then, with a contented sigh, he leaned against Ethan's leg and continued walking. The plaque in the garden would narrate their story for generations, but the true legacy resided in the quiet moments, the way Ethan's hands no longer trembled when he reached for his dog, the way Atlas still checked on Ethan's breathing as he slept, the way they moved through the world as two halves of a single, unbreakable whole. Some bonds transcend explanation. Some love defies all logic. And sometimes, just sometimes, a second chance arrives on four paws, with soulful eyes and a heart vast enough to heal the world.